And we're back. Going through the 7 churches a little bit more in depth. And we're up to the 4th church, Thyatira. Jesus says, Revelation 2:18, to the angel of the church in Thyatira, write, these are the words of the Son of God. Now this is after his character. And there's going to be a reason why he tells him this in just a minute. These are the words of the Son of God, whose eyes are like a blazing fire and whose feet are like polished bronze. There's a reason why he says that. Verse 19, I know your deeds, your love, your faith, your service, your perseverance, and your latest deeds are greater than your first. Who's patting him on the back? You're doing good. Right? You're hanging in there. You're persevering. You're walking that walk. But he says, I have some things against you. He says, you tolerate that woman Jezebel. Now, this was not Jezebel from the Old Testament. We'll go into this more in a minute. But he says, I've got some things against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel who calls herself a prophetess. By her teaching, she misleads my servants to be sexually immoral and to eat food sacrificed to idols. There it is again, the 2 big things. Sexual immorality and food sacrificed to idols. Right? Even though I have given her time to repent of her immorality, she's unwilling. Now, this was actually a person that was in the Thyatira church that Jesus labels as a Jezebel. Okay? 22. Behold, I will cast her into a bed of sickness, and those who commit adultery with her will suffer great tribulation unless they repent of her deeds. Is this like an early reference to a venereal disease? I don't know. Or is it just a spiritual reference to a type of spiritual venereal disease? Don't know on that, but it's pretty strong words from Jesus. Verse 23, then I will strike her children dead. That's pretty harsh. And all the churches will know that I am the one who searches minds and hearts, and I will repay each of you according to your deeds. When Jesus says that to somebody, you better sit up and listen. Verse 24, but I say to the rest of you in Thyatira, who do not hold to her teachings and have not learned the so-called deep things of Satan. She must have been leading them way down the primrose path there. I will place no further burden upon you. Verse 25, than to hold fast to what you have until I come. Verse 26, and to the one who overcomes and continues in my work until the end, I will give authority over the nations. That's interesting. Verse 27, he will rule them with an iron scepter and shatter them like pottery, just as I have received authority from my Father. 28, and I will give him the morning star. 29, he who has an ear to hear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The letter to the Christians in Thyatira is the longest of the 7 letters that Jesus wrote, although Thyatira was the smallest of the 7 cities. And it's a little bit stronger because Jesus opens up with kind of a judgment. Thyatira is called the corrupted church. The name Thyatira means perpetual sacrifice. And in the historic the historic prophetic realm, this was about 500 to 1500 AD in the Dark Ages, in the medieval times. This was the rise of papal power and corruption in the church. And so that's why it is that it likens that part of history to this corrupted church in Thyatira. It's a type and a shadow, basically. So this is 500 to 1500 AD, when the Roman Catholic Church ruled and reigned at this point, until 1517. And again, if you know your history, all of a sudden we see Martin Luther come on the scene. And October 31st of 1570, Martin Luther nails his 95 thesis to the door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany. And this act, which served as a protest against the state and the indulgence of the Catholic Church, and it called for academic debate, is traditionally considered the start of the Protestant Reformation. And that period in history is likened back to this Thyatira church, the corrupted church. Because at this point was the Dark Ages, it was medieval. The only ones that had education, or the only ones that had access to the Word of God, was the elite and the priesthood again. The Catholic priesthood in this case. In Jesus' time it was the Pharisees. But at this point in history, 500 to 1500 AD, it would have been the Catholic Church, and they were the only ones. And what happened is it threw Europe into the Dark Ages, so that nobody was educated. It was a caste system. You were either the nobility or the clergy, or you were the serfs. The lords and the serfs type of thing. And so, in 1517, this is when Martin Luther nails his edict to the door of the church, right? And the Protestant Reformation started out. Now, as Jesus is talking about the church at Thyatira, he's saying that you have some strengths: your love, your faith, your service, your growth. But he said, I do have some concerns because you tolerate that false prophetess, Jezebel, who's leading you into immorality. And so he calls them to repent and hold fast to the truth. And the promise is the authority with Christ and the morning star. Now, Thyatira was founded by Alexander the Great. And he founded it as a military garrison. It was a commercial city with numerous guilds, and each one of those had its own temple god, again. And a woman known as a chief prophetess presided over one of the temples of the fortune tellers in Thyatira. And Thyatira also produced the most expensive garments in that part of the world. Workers took a special shellfish from the Mediterranean Sea, known as the murex, and extracted purple dye from it, using the dye to color the wool. We're going to talk more about that in a minute with a person in Acts 16 by the name of Lydia. And so Thyatira was founded by Alexander the Great as a military garrison. The temple of Apollo was there. And Apollo was one of the main gods. You hear his name quite a lot. But there was no real record of real persecution against the Christians in Thyatira. So they all just kind of got along, and they went about their trades, and their trades were the textiles. The water in Thyatira was so rich in minerals that they dyed the cloth red and sometimes purple, and it made this city famous. Now, in Acts 16, Lydia, who was a supporter of Paul, was known as a seller of purple. And she was from Thyatira. Right? Jesus introduces himself to the church in Thyatira as the Son of God. which has authority. Apollo was known as the son of God because Zeus was the father of all gods. Apollo was his son, if I remember correctly. And Thyatira also had a lot of manufacturing that went on, not only the textiles, but they also had bronzesmiths, ironsmiths, silversmiths, and they made pottery, and their pottery was very coveted, right? It was an entire social area, industrial, and the structure of Thyatira was built around the guilds, like the labor unions. Notice what Jesus says up here. He says, these are the words of the Son of God. It's a direct point against Apollo. Jesus is the Son of God, whose eyes are like a blazing fire. The people in Thyatira are going to understand that because of the kilns that they had to produce all of the bronze and the iron and all of that type of thing, and whose feet are like polished bronze. He's saying, I am the one who was tried in the fire, and I come out as the polished bronze. I am the cream of the crop. I am the top of that. And so as he was saying that to the people at Thyatira, that's what he was talking about. Now, the labor unions here. They had the guilds. They were like labor unions. And all of the guilds held festivals in the temple of Apollo. And this was a problem for the Christians because it was filled with revelry and debauchery and drunkenness and immorality. But if you didn't attend, you risk bringing the wrath of Apollo down on the entire guild. So it wasn't just you. It wasn't just you saying, I'm not going to participate in this particular thing that's going on. I'm not going to participate in this particular strike with the union. Now, I agree maybe with what they're doing or whatever, but I'm not going to go out there and picket. Neither am I going to cross the picket lines, or whatever. But the problem is that if you didn't attend these festivals, these orgies of drunkenness and debauchery, that it wasn't just you, but you were risking bringing the wrath of Apollo down upon the entire union, the entire guild, the entire labor union that was there. Talk about peer pressure. These people in Thyatira, they had some peer pressure going on, right? Now, Jesus goes on. He says, yeah, you were faithful in, some certain things, but he said, I do have something against you, and that is because you tolerate this prophetess Jezebel. Now remember that in the city of Thyatira that we had chief prophetesses that were like over some of the different temples and the temple fortune tellers and some of that type of thing. So when he talks about this prophetess, again, her name wasn't actually Jezebel. But Jesus likens her unto Jezebel, who is manipulating them into attending these festivals. Go along to get along is basically the thing. Now, we remember Jezebel in the Old Testament. Jezebel was the wife of Ahab, who was a very corrupt king of Israel. Jezebel came to power when she was about 15 years old. So if you can think of the amount of hormones and temper tantrums that a 15-year-old girl has, and you put her in charge of ruling the country, You understand what was going on. Now, Ahab was much older than her, but he did whatever she said. And she brought in pagan worship, sacrificing human sacrifices to idols and all types of things like that. And so here's the thing about Jezebel. She was the neck that turned the head. Jezebel was the queen, but she wasn't the king. King Ahab was the one who actually was the one that should have been an authority and in charge, but he listened to her constantly. And the way that she got her way, this was in the days of Elisha, the ways that she got her way was through manipulation. So she was an illegitimate authority. Sometimes we talk about spiritually the spirit of Jezebel, which is an illegitimate authority. It's a spirit of manipulation. I've seen this throughout our ministry in the churches many, many different times, and it's a sad thing that comes along. And let me be very quick to say that the spirit of Jezebel is not always a woman. I have seen men who have functioned in the spirit of Jezebel with manipulation and coercion, right? But I have found different instances that a lot of times that if you have a woman in the church who is not happy at home, and maybe her husband is not leading her spiritually the way that he should be, or maybe he's not even a Christian, and she's a Christian and she is at home and she can't control the things that go on in her life at home, a lot of times she will come into the context of the church and try to control that and try to control it through manipulation. We see it also in men that when they don't have courage, they don't have intestinal fortitude, and in order to get their way, they have to manipulate, they have to talk behind your back, they have to come to you and say, well, there's a lot of us in the church that feel this way. Usually when somebody says that, I say, well, who feels that way? Is it just you? Is it you and one other person? Is it you and 10 other people? You say a lot of us feel that way. Who is it? Most of the time, well, I want to protect their identity or whatever. And it's like, well, then, it is what it is within that. And so I've seen it both ways, both men and women that try to manipulate this. And obviously, this is what Jesus was talking about to the church at Thyatira, was that you are allowing this prophetess Jezebel to come in here and to manipulate you into attending the festivals and eating the food that is sacrificed to idols and even indulging in sexual immorality, because she's manipulating you. If you don't go along to get along, then you're gonna shame the entire guild that you're a part of. We see this all the time. Compromise. Somebody at work, just turn your head. Just look the other way on this. Don't be upfront. Don't be upright. Don't do the right things. Just, you don't have to go along with it, but just don't say anything. Just turn your head. Just look the other way. And so Jesus starts the letter, and he identifies himself as the Son of God, right? Directly against Apollo. And it's apropos to the church. And he describes himself with the feet of bronze and the eyes of burnished flame, a description that the people of the guilds of Thyatira would have understood. And he says to them, you're going to smash the powers that be with a rod of iron. Because, he says, I am the bright and morning star. He says this in Revelation 21. And so this is the message that he is giving to the church at Thyatira. So Jesus leaves the church at Thyatira with these words. To the one who overcomes and continues in my work until the end, I will give authority over the nations. He's talking about this in the futuristic sense. And he may also be talking about this to you and me with the one who overcomes and continues in my work. Now, later on during the millennium, we are going to rule and reign with Jesus. We are actually going to reign over certain cities. We're going to be the mayor of a particular city or whatever it may be. At least that's what it's thought to be. But he says here, to him who overcomes and continues in my work until the end. That is something that he is telling you and me to do, to persevere. There are a lot of people that want to write novels. You know that I write novels. I can't remember who it was, the famous novelist who said, in order to be a good writer, you have to do two things. You have to write, and you have to finish what you wrote. And that's kind of the thing that I kind of think of here. He who overcomes and continues in my work until the end. I can't tell you the number of people that have come to me when they find out that I'm an author, and they say, "Oh yeah, really? Yeah, I've always thought I have a book in me." And they might. I encourage them to try it and to write and everything. And there are many people that I have encountered in writing conferences and all, who start to write. They feel like they have a good idea and they start to write a particular novel, but they never finish it. And I can't tell you the satisfaction that you have if you were an author, if you were a writer, whether it's fiction or whether it's nonfiction. Maybe it's a spiritual book that you're writing, but I can't tell you the amount of satisfaction that you have by simply finishing a novel or finishing a book. I can remember when I wrote Altar, the amount of satisfaction that I got when I typed the last sentence in that book. It's just something that's there. And I relive that every time that I finish a book. When I feel like I've got a good resonant ending that resonates, and I finish that. And so there's something to finishing. We might not be fast. We might not be flashy. But there is something in the finishing. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. To the one who overcomes and continues in my work until the end. There are a lot of people that become Christians and then later on, and we have a big term that I do not appreciate and that I do not like, and it's sad that we even have this term and use it, but it's deconstructing. I used to be a Christian, and now I'm deconstructing. Now I'm questioning everything about Christianity, and I'm getting out of Christianity, and I don't think that it's the way anymore, and I'm a deconstructing person, and I'm deconstructing that. That word has slipped into our vocabulary, and it's sad, it's sad with that. We used to call it, losing the faith or stepping away from the faith. Some people called it backsliding or whatever, but now the boutique term is deconstructing. And it's kind of a sad state of affair. And it's a deception of Satan. I have compassion on people that are deconstructing because there's something that caused them to do that. It's kind of like, I worked in the corporate world a great deal and was a bivocational pastor most of my ministry because we pastored very small churches that were not able to support us and all. And it was, it's just what it was. I'm not poo-pooing that or anything, but when I was in the corporate world and I would, people would know that I was a minister or whatever. They would try to be real careful around me, not cuss and, do that stuff. And I'd always tell them it doesn't bother me. I worked construction too, those guys are pretty rough and all. But it's always been interesting to me because I remember I was in the break room one time and had a person, I don't remember what the whole conversation was, but I found out that they had a religious upbringing, but they didn't want to have anything to do with God. They didn't want to have anything to do with church. And so I sat down and I talked to this person and I said, what brought you to this point? And I wasn't there to try to convince this person, to become a Christian or anything. And I've done it with both men and women before too, asked them the same question. But I asked them, what brought you to this point? If you had a religious upbringing and you knew about God, what is it that made you step away from that? And I was always interested in that, and I've heard all kinds of different answers throughout the years of why people do that. And most of the time it's, because they got hurt by church people, or they felt like God let them down. God didn't answer their prayer. They had something horrendous happen in their life. I had a brother that was dying and I prayed for him and God didn't save him and he died. And so I didn't want to have anything to do with God anymore. And it's sad. It's a deception of Satan that comes into that. And so when I look at this with the church at Thyatira here, to the one who overcomes and continues in my work until the end, it's like, again, we may not be flashy, we may not be fast. It's kind of the story of the tortoise and the hare, just that slow progression, putting one foot in front of the other. And definitely we have labeled it a lot of times as a journey. Our Christian faith is definitely a journey. There's ups and downs, there's mountains and there's valleys. But Jesus says, to him who continues until the end, I'm going to give you authority over nations. And he says, I'm going to give them the iron scepter and shatter them like pottery, just as I have received authority from my Father. So he's talking about within the brokenness of that, he's going to put it back together and he's going to give them the rule there. And he says, and I will give them the morning star. And that's what he's talking about later on in Revelation 22 about being the bright and morning star. He says, so to him who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. And with the church at Thyatira, he was telling them, don't let the world's corruption get to you, because your name alone means perpetual sacrifice. So reform yourself. Come back into God's reformation. Because you have love, you have faith, you have service. But don't tolerate those people that are going to manipulate you and try to get you back into the things that you know are not good for you and that you're not supposed to do. So that's a little bit about Thyatira. See you next time, and we will talk about Sardis.